watching The Holy Land Uncovered. I'm Jordana Miller. I'm delighted now to invite onto the show a scientist and a spiritual leader, Gregg Braden. He's an acclaimed author who has topped the New York Times bestseller list 5 times, and he's here in Israel to give a series of lectures. We're so honored to have him. Greg, so glad that you made time for us.
No, thank you for having me here. I'm thrilled to be here today.
So much to talk about. First, you know, you have a certain message for many people that combines science and reaching our full potential. Tell us a little bit about what you think it is that people are so attracted to in your work.
I think people know, Jordana, that something different is happening in our world right now. The world is changing in ways that we're not prepared for, that we haven't expected. The best minds of our time are telling us we're living what they call a time of extremes. And what that means is we have to think and live differently, more so now than we ever have in the past, because the way we have been conditioned to think is simply not solving the problems that we find in our lives, whether it's in our families or between nations. It's all the same.
What is that way that we've been conditioned that doesn't work anymore?
We are steeped in a story in Western society, Western civilization, based upon the science. It's about 150 years old. Charles Darwin's theories of evolution, for example, telling us that nature is based upon a model of competition, of struggle, of conflict, of scarcity. And although we're living in the 21st century, those ideas were actually proposed in the late 1800s when our society was forming, when the economic systems were beginning, when the corporate systems were being developed. They are all based upon this way of thinking that the new science is now telling us is simply not true, that nature is actually based upon a model of cooperation, not competition, and what scientists call mutual aid. So when we begin looking at a changing world, if we're going to truly solve the problems, not simply put a Band-Aid on those problems, my feeling is that we owe it to ourselves to honor what these new discoveries are saying, and to honor these deep relationships that we have with the world and with nature, so that we can bring lasting peace to our nations and lasting healing to our bodies and our societies.
So does that mean that as individuals we need to adopt a model about which promotes peace, cooperation, symbiosis instead of conflict?
I think ultimately that's what it means. However, in the last 33 years, I have been on every continent of the earth. I've spent a tremendous time with the ancient and indigenous peoples that are still preserving that wisdom in the earth today. And what I've found is you simply cannot tell people to live in peace. People need to find a way to think differently, and the peace is the outcome of that way of thinking. So my experience with people is when the facts are clear, the choices become obvious. And when the facts are clear of the way that we truly function, our deep relationships to the earth and to one another and to our past, people don't need to be told what to do, because that is the logical outcome of what they now understand to be true.
So how do people get there?
I think, for me, the way to get there, science has become the contemporary language of spirituality. And I'm going to make a distinction between spirituality and religion. The spiritual understandings of our relationships existed long before religions came along. The religions came along later and wrapped the rules around these deeper spiritual understandings. And when we talk about spirituality, we're talking about the relationship between ourselves and one another, the relationship we have with our own bodies, with the earth, with the past, with the future, with the cosmos, with God. Those understandings have been around for 5,000 years, but the religions came along later and created the rules that in many instances began to help people to feel separate from themselves and separate from the cosmos, separate from God.
Do you think traditional religion in that sense has been a divider instead of uniting? Not in all cases, but certainly in some?
Well, what I found is every religion that I've ever studied offers a piece of a bigger picture. And most religions, they focus on one particular piece. So if we can cut through the religion and go to the spiritual truths that tell us we are connected with one another, we are connected with the earth, we are connected with our bodies, that we are the only form of life born with the ability, Jordana, to self-regulate our own bodies in ways that we've never been taught in the past. We can self-regulate our immune response. We can self-regulate the anti-aging enzymes within our bodies. We can create personal resilience to tremendous change. We haven't been taught that. We've been taught that we are powerless, that we are helpless, relatively helpless, and that we are relatively insignificant. The science is no longer supporting that. So my work is about the new science, peer-reviewed science on the one hand. On the other hand, it simply is not making it into the mainstream.
Do we have to give up God in this, in your kind of description of the new science and the path to ourselves?
Absolutely not. From my experience, when people began to understand these deep relationships, and remember now 150 years, new discoveries are overturning 150 years of scientific thinking, revealing the new scientific truths. And those truths are actually helping people feel more connected to themselves, to one another, to the earth, and to God, because they tell a story that I feel we probably sense within ourselves, but it simply is not supported in the world around us. And that is the story of connectivity, of empowerment, of personal empowerment.
So I want to come back to that point of personal empowerment.
Yeah.
But first, I want to ask you, when you say new science, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's not new science, they're new discoveries.
New discoveries.
Yeah, and this is the thing, I'm a scientist, I'm a degree geologist, I've got a strong background in the life sciences, molecular biology and chemistry and things like that. And it has enabled me to look into these very obscure, very technical scientific journals where these discoveries are being made. However, they're being relegated to obscure scientific journals. So what I'm simply doing is taking these discoveries that mainstream scientists know. Now, this isn't pop science like that you see on the newsstand, the airports. This is hardcore, peer-reviewed mainstream science that is now telling us that these relationships exist. However, there's a reluctance, and I have to say, in many cases, a resistance in mainstream media to share these discoveries. So you're not seeing it in mainstream classrooms, mainstream textbooks, mainstream documentaries. Why do you think? When I ask that question...
And are you talking about science's space, astronomy?
I'll give you some examples. We're still teaching our young people, for example, that civilization is only 5,000 years old, began with ancient Sumeria, when the evidence, the archaeological evidence, peer-reviewed archaeological evidence is now showing advanced technological civilizations over twice that into the last ice age, 13,000 years before present. We're still teaching our young people that evolution is the only way to think about human existence on the one hand. The other hand, the new DNA studies, some of them are less than 5 years old, are now showing us that evolution, while it is a fact for some forms of life, it is not the human story. Our DNA is not the result of Neanderthal, for example. We did not descend from Neanderthal. When it sounds like Jurassic Park, when they can extract the DNA from the ancient remains of Neanderthal, for example, and then they compare that DNA to ours, there's not enough of an overlap. We shared the earth with them. We did not descend from them.
If I wanted to read those DNA studies, where are they?
They are in peer-reviewed journals like the journal Nature, very prestigious journal Nature, volume 404, page 490 of the year 2000 is when the Neanderthal study was published. The discovery was made in 1987, and it took from 1987, Jordana, to the year 2000 for those studies to be released. I'll tell you the story. It's an amazing story. A baby Neanderthal girl was discovered deep in a cave in northern Europe in a state of preservation that we've never seen before. Her remains were dated to 30,000 years before present.
But is that, to play devil's advocate, is that the fringe opinion? Because the scientific opinion still seems to be that we are connected closer to prehistoric man than...
This is why the new science or the new discoveries are so important, because this is peer-reviewed science. It's not theory, it's not hypothesis, it's not speculation. Peer-reviewed science now is confirmed we did not descend from Neanderthal. They're also telling us that modern humans, what are called anatomically modern humans, appeared 200,000 years before present and have not changed until now. We are the anatomically modern humans.
We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. So much more coming up for you here on the Holy Land Uncovered. Stay with us.
Stories. Stories that touch your heart and open your eyes. Stories that take you on a journey and show you something you will never forget. Look through the lens and see what others see. High definition, documentaries and discussions that connect us all. Join Lauren Izzo at 10:03 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Fearless, timely, and always engaging. Every night, David Schuster brings the news from around the world to your front door. Watch Stateside, weeknights at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I-24 News.
News 24 es el magazine semanal de noticias y análisis en español de I-24 News. Mi nombre es Carlos Burovich y conmigo en el estudio Damián Pachter y Yaniv Azulay.
Analizaremos todo lo que pasa en Israel y el Medio Oriente.
También pondremos nuestra mirada en el mundo hispanoparlante.
News 24 es el magazine semanal en español, todos los viernes, solo en I-24 News.
Welcome back to the Holy Land Uncovered. I'm Jordana Miller. I want to bring back into the studio our scientific and spiritual leader, Gregg Braden. He's here in Israel giving a number of lectures. He's a New York Times bestseller, and I just want to continue our conversation. Many religions say that they actually empower man. The one case I can give you from Jewish tradition is that man is so empowered he can have arguments with God. Right. He is, when we talk about becoming your full potential, that is something that the Hasidim, one sect of Judaism, talk about. There's a story when, at the end of days, when you go up to, when you have a conversation, they're not going to say, "Why weren't you Moses?" They're going to say, "Why weren't you Gregg Braden?" Right? So religion can, in a sense, it's not necessarily in conflict with a lot of the stuff that you're saying.
Absolutely not. My experience is that, once again, the better we know ourselves, the better equipped we are to deal with change in our world, the less we fear the change. And the better we know ourselves, the less we fear one another. And the more willing we are to embrace change in the world. And I think religion can play a very powerful social role. It's a very cohesive agent in our society today. And this is where science is now on for what they call forbidden territory. And I love this term because I mentioned earlier the DNA studies. When scientists are looking at the DNA that makes us who we are, and I'll be specific, human chromosome number 2 is a perfect example. It is the result of an ancient fusion of 2 pre-existing chromosomes, and once the fusion happened, there were modifications and tweakings that cannot be explained by evolution. They happened quickly. They did not happen slowly, gradually over long periods of time. They suggest an intentionality, and that implies a purpose to human existence. That, from a religious perspective or a spiritual perspective, I think brings things full circle. Science cannot tell us who or why these things happen, but science can tell us what happened in the past. The DNA that makes us who we are, it was changed 200,000 years ago. We have not changed since. And so when we emerged as what are called anatomically modern humans, we had the capacities then that we have right now, and it suggests that we are intended to somehow embrace this extraordinary potential, these amazing abilities that we're only beginning to understand. Self-regulation is a perfect example, and we've mentioned some of the ways of doing that.
To do that. You have written about the heart and the science of the heart and connecting that to happiness. Tell me a little bit about that.
New discoveries are continuing to change the way we think. And I will be the first to admit, Jordana, these are very different ways of thinking. And that's why I think it's important to stay with rock-solid science. This isn't speculation or hypothesis. It's just not science that's being shared commonly. One of those components is the discovery in 1991, 40,000 specialized cells in the human heart that are called sensory neurites. They're like brain cells, but they're not in the brain.
Right.
They're in the heart. However, they provide the same function. They think, they feel, they remember independently of the human brain on the one hand. And on the other hand, what we now know is they can be harmonized with the brain. We can harmonize the heart and the brain, two organs, into a single potent system that gives us this extraordinary potential. And this is where the spiritual traditions come in, because many of the practices in our most cherished spiritual traditions are all about harmonizing the heart and the brain. They're just not using scientific language.
Right, and this is the modern age, the age of science, the age of man. We tend to focus on the brain, but ancient cultures and even in Jewish tradition, the heart was really considered the center of the human body,
well,
not the brain.
I'm in my 60s now. When I was in school, I was taught the brain is the master organ of the body, and it's still being taught today. We all know the brain is important. However, the science is showing us the brain gets many of the instructions that tell the brain what to do from the signals that we generate in our heart, and those signals are based upon feelings and emotions, the very conditions in Western society that we're taught to discount. So in the indigenous traditions, they cherish and embrace the ability to regulate emotion and feeling, and we're taught, especially males in the Western society, are taught to discount them and ignore them, and truly that's where our power comes from.
Greg, this is your first trip to Israel.
It is.
You were telling me that it took you many years to actually get here. What does it mean to you to be here, and how are you experiencing Israel?
For me, this is a dream of a lifetime. I've been invited to speak in Israel 3 times in the past. 3 times I was told to postpone my trip because the conditions simply weren't good. So I am here now, and there's something about this land. Something happened here 3,000 years ago that changed forever the face of the earth and the way that people think about one another. And although the wisdom contained in the history and the culture, it's ancient, definitely, but it is not obsolete. And I believe that this is a powerful component as we become a globalized society and we learn to share this world and our resources with one another in ways that we've never had to do before. The wisdom of our ancestors, I believe, is a key component to bring peace rather than war to our land, if we understand that wisdom. And it begins with us, Jordana. And once again, the better we know ourselves, the less we fear one another. I cannot overemphasize that. And as we are now melding cultures and civilizations in a way that has never been done, because we are a globalized society, we've got to think differently. And I think this is the key, to understand the message of those ancient traditions. What did they know in their time that we've forgotten in ours? Or perhaps more importantly, what did they know that we're only beginning to understand? So this is a new frontier, and I can't think of anything more exciting. And much of that history and that evidence is under our feet in this land. That's right. Do you feel a sense of spirituality here? A different kind of intensity or level of that here? I feel a lot of people who come here say they do. It's something in the air. It's something in the water. It's, you know, as they travel across the country. It's everything. In the desert, we feel one thing. When we're in the old city, we feel something else. But there is a wisdom preserved in the letters of the Torah, for example, or as a perfect example of an unchanging way of a code, a way of thinking of ourselves and our relationship to the world. And as we scientifically unravel that code, it becomes the contemporary language for the science, bridging the science and the spirituality. As a scientist, I worked in the corporations during the Cold War years, one of the most frightening times in the history of our past. And I felt strongly that if we know where to look into our past and how, we would find the keys to prevent the kinds of wars that we have seen in our lifetimes and never have those wars again. And I've dedicated my life to looking for those keys, and I believe an important part of that is right here in this land. As we say, from your lips to God's ears. Gregg Braden, so great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me. We're going to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere. So much more coming up for you on the Holy Land Uncovered. Stay with us.